and Sara Ring will be presenting. Sara Ring is a continuing education librarian at Minitex in the Digital Initiatives and Metadata Education Unit. She develops and presents training on linked data and metadata standards for digital collections and digital preservation. So Sara, I will let you take it away.
Thanks, Beth. Hi, everyone. I'm going to jump right in. I had to cut this presentation down several times. I do see a couple names in the list of people who recently attended another session I did back in early February, and that was like a 3-hour intro to linked data. So I do have one new example, but now's your time to choose another session because it is a repeat of some of the things I talked about then. So welcome. I've been thinking and learning about linked data since about 2012. And while development has ebbed and flowed over the last several years, there have been a couple projects in the last couple years I'm really excited to share with you. And at least it brought me back in because my interest has also ebbed and flowed over the years. So this session, as the title says, will offer just a glimpse at what libraries are doing now with linked data, how it affects us as library staff, how it affects our users, and how you might get involved in the future if this piques your interest. So I planned this session as if it was an introduction. I wanted to reach a broader audience, so I'm going to give a little bit of an intro to what linked data is, what it is, what are the building blocks that make up linked data before I jump in and show you some of those projects I referred to earlier. So linked open data is a set of best practices for exposing and sharing and also consuming structured data so that it can interlink with other data. And by linking data within and across other repositories, across other collections, libraries can provide rich or more rich knowledge discovery experiences for our user communities. That's the general definition of linked data. And also an important point I want to make on this slide, if you look at the third bullet there, using web technologies to connect data that is related but stored in different locations. So a little bit more about what linked data is. The Resource Description Framework, or RDF, is the underlying structure of linked data. And it's also a model in which knowledge can be represented in statements about resources. And a resource can be anything you encounter in the world. It can be a person, it can be a place or a concept. But it also provides a way to describe relationships between those resources. So RDF is made up of statements. Statements are referred to as triples because each statement is made up of 3 component parts. So we have a subject, predicate, and object piece of a triple. So here's a quick example. This is my statement. The author of Not a Lot of Reasons to Sing, But Enough is Kyle Tranmere, our keynote from yesterday. And if I broke that down into RDF, into one triple, it'd look like this. We have a subject piece, which is Not a Lot of Reasons to Sing, But Enough, the book. The predicate piece of the triple is author, and then the object, Kyle Tranmere. So I can go a step further. Here's a graph view of a few different statements or triples. So this is my rudimentary mock-up of some RDF as a graph. And in an RDF database, it's a little different than what we're used to with our library collections and how they're organized and stored in databases. But the statements are stored in a kind of graph database called the triple store. So here we have Kyle Tranmeyer. If we start at the bottom, well, he's a person, has name Kyle Tranmeyer. And I'll move my cursor here so you can see it. There we go. We also have person created book, has title, not a lot of reasons to sing, but enough. Person is a presenter at a conference, which has the name Minitex Connect. And then I have conference shared his book. So again, very rudimentary mock-up of some RDF, but can you sort of see RDF is built on relationships and defining relationships between things or between resources. That's what I'm trying to get across here. And then there are also other linked data rules that were established by Tim Berners-Lee, inventor of the World Wide Web. I won't get into a lot of them, but for example, you can use what's called URIs or uniform resource identifiers as names for things. So instead of using Kyle Tranmeyer, the text of his name, I could assign a unique identifier or a URI that tells an application or a machine that's trying to access that data that this is the person, Kyle Tranmeyer. So there are other rules I'm not going to get into because I only have 25 minutes and I want to show you the potential here. But just know that by adding URIs for things, we're creating machine actionable data. And we're just making it easier for applications to process that data, to connect users with more related data sets. And then another important point I want to bring up is there's also in the original document Tim Berners-Lee wrote up called Design Principles. He laid out the plan for enabling data across the web to be truly linked together. And he made the statement, with linked data, when you have some of it, you can find other related data. So that's another crucial point I want to bring up, and hopefully you'll see it in some of the examples that I share later. So bringing it back to libraries, why is linked data an attractive option to libraries? Here are just a few promises of moving towards linked data in libraries. Ultimately, linked data in libraries can lead to these better outcomes. It could lead to more web visibility for us. When people see and use information, the majority of them are starting their searching on the web. Most of them using some sort of search engine, right? And most of our library data is often hidden to users that start their search that way if they don't come to us, to our catalog or to our databases. So publishing library data to web-friendly standards that can be understood outside our community and consumed by others is the main goal. And linked data can lead to a better user experience. That's a huge one. So by defining relationships between things or between resources, we can provide better discovery for our users. And I'll be showing some examples of this later. And having our data represented in this way can lead to new functionality as well. So for example, the ability to answer a question that is put into a search box with a query, not just having the system try to match our keyword search that we put in. And this is possible because relationships between resources are defined in linked data. And then finally, it can lead to some cleaner data if we're using unique identifiers and URIs for our pieces of data that we have. We can do things like have shared repositories of some common data that we use in our collections. And we already do this in libraries. We have Library of Congress subject headings. Many libraries are using for subjects and other controlled vocabularies. Okay, so that was your really quick intro to linked data, why libraries are thinking about it. And now to the fun part, the more fun part, I want to talk about a few of the organizations that are doing work in this area, and then who are the people that are pushing us in this direction. So I definitely have to mention the Library of Congress. They're one of the early players in linked data and libraries. In I think it was 2009, they first released their Library of Congress subject headings as linked data. So they published that through their own web service called id.llc.gov. So if you go to there, you will actually see a list of not just Library of Congress subject headings, but all of their vocabularies represented and published as linked data. So the example on the slide is showing the Toni Morrison entity, and you can see she has a unique identifier for her as an author. They also, of course, many of you know, have been working towards BibFrame. So you may have heard that and have been following that. It's been under development for, I think, around 12 years or so, but it's a data model that makes relationship connections in our bibliographic data using RDF. So it's often explained as the eventual replacement to the MARC record. And this work evolved from, well, one, there was a report that came out in 2008 called On the Record. I don't know if anyone recalls that report, but in it, one recommendation highlighted was that the web should be our technology platform in libraries, as the quest for information most often begins on the web. So the Library of Congress has definitely been working in this direction in many different ways, including moving towards BibFrame replacement for the MARC format. Last I heard on the January update, I think it was at least 90% of their staff are cataloging using BibFrame in production, using their own editor for doing that work. So things are moving along on that front. And I have to definitely mention OCLC because they've been delving into linked data experimentation for the past 12 years or so as well. If you look on the left, they published their FAST headings, the Virtual International Authority file, and others starting in about 2009. And then if you work your way from left to right, their most recent project is Shared Entity Management Infrastructure. And there's a little bit of information on the website about it, but not a lot yet. But it looks promising. It's going to be a place for libraries to access stable URIs for works and for persons. And I definitely want to mention the linked data for X projects. So linked data for libraries, which sprung up in about 2014. It was a Mellon Foundation funded project. And it was awarded to Cornell. And they wanted to look at how linked data could be tapped into for better end user discoverability and access. And then they collaborated with some others like Harvard and Stanford. And it's been through now a few different iterations. Linked data for production followed that work. This is all grant funded work. And they're now on this LD4P3 stage. And that stage is meant, as the slide says, to close the loop, to actually create a working model of linked data, of a complete cycle for creating, sharing, providing access to library data in this way. So I want to talk about one area of work in LD4P3, and it's on the discovery side, because they're looking at what can we do now to enhance our library catalog data with data from other linked data sources. recognizing that in libraries, we'll likely be living in a hybrid world with our MARC records and linked open data. So they're looking at what can we do now? So I want to show you just a couple things. This is a screen capture of, this isn't in production, I don't believe, but it's from their library catalog, and it's for a record for the title Middlemarch, authored by George Eliot. And they do a ton of documentation of this on the website, by the way. So when I share my slides, the links will be available, and you can go and check out some of their other work. So their motivation for doing this work, they wanted to allow their users to have more open-ended discovery. So not just going to their catalog and doing a known item search, but how can they bring in information around context, and how can they bring in more information around people that are mentioned in the records in their catalog. So if you look next to the author information, there's an author info button. And if you click on that, we see a little snippet of George Eliot, a little more information about that author. But if we click on view full info, this is basically kind of their knowledge panel for author information. And what's unique about it is that none of this is data that exists in their catalog record. This is all pulled from other linked open data sources. So anywhere you see a blue link, it's telling you where that data is coming from. This image is coming from a resource called Wikidata, which I'll talk about next. DBpedia is another where they're grabbing this description, biographical description. And this other factual information about the author is coming from Wikidata. One more thing I wanted to point out, if you were to scroll down in the record, at the very bottom, there are these tabs, and I know this is hard to see, but there's a tab called Influences. And if you click on it, you can see George Eliot, who he was an influence for, who he was influenced by. This information, again, it lives outside of the catalog. They're able to use this information and bring it in by querying the Library of Congress's linked data service. They are looking up the George Eliot entity, and there they're able to find a Wikidata URI for George Eliot, and they're able to go off and query Wikidata, and that's where they're pulling in this influencer information. That is laid out in Wikidata in that repository. So this is going back to that, when you have some linked data, you can find other related data. They're going to Library of Congress. From there, they're jumping to Wikidata, and they're able to pull in this extra contextual information. Okay, so that's a little bit about the discovery side, what some libraries are working on, what can we do now to bring in and enhance what we currently have with additional information from linked open data sources. I want to switch gears here and talk about Wikidata. If you attended a session yesterday, Wikidata was mentioned, another project, which is fascinating. But if you didn't attend that session, I'll define it. Wikidata is just a structured knowledge base, and it gathers all the factual information that powers all of the Wikimedia sister projects, like Wikipedia, for example. And it's a place where the data can be edited and viewed by both humans, but also machines. So anybody can query the information that's found there as well. So I would say it really took off in about 2017. It's now becoming the hub for adding library identifiers to Wikidata. And many, many libraries are starting to experiment with connecting their library data to Wikidata. Because once the data sets are connected, you're able to, as I just showed you in that Cornell example, pull in information that may not exist in your own database, but could enhance the discovery experience for your users. So there are hundreds of examples of this, literally, but I only have time to show you one. This is one I just learned about. And what hits me about this is the numbers. So this is from, I just learned about this at the Smithsonian Digitization Conference, and it's from the American Women's History Initiative, which is a project to amplify histories of American women. They hosted 23 editathons, Wikipedia editathons. So they added new content that didn't exist about different women in history that they had content about. One stat they threw out was after adding a Wikipedia article about a woman named Vera Simons, 15 minutes after adding that new article, it was Google search result number 3. Now, if you search for Vera Simons, it's number 1. And we know that Google's definitely a big consumer of Wikipedia information, Wikidata, and so on. Another thing they did was they had their artists actually draw portraits of women if they didn't own photographs of them, and they added them to Wikimedia Commons. And by doing that, they were able to then link to them from the Wikipedia articles and also from Wikidata. And what struck me, they only added about 700 images to Wikimedia Commons, and they reported they had over 19 million views just from those 700 images, which blows my mind. I wish we had those stats in digital collections. And then finally, they added content to Wikidata, that structured knowledge base. The backend is linked data. It's a linked open data repository. So just to quickly show you, here's an example of something they added to Wikidata. It's Mary Lincoln's dress, and it's an item page for her. And this is like a human readable view behind the scenes. This is RDF, but it's broken down into statements that describe Mary Lincoln's dress. So they added content like that to Wikidata, and then just pulling it all together, they shared this example, which I loved. So if you go to that URL on the slide, you'll actually be able to interact with this. And it's a query. It's actually showing you a knowledge graph of the relationships between all of these different entities and things that the Smithsonian owns in their digital collections that they have added to Wikimedia Commons and Wikidata and Wikipedia. So if we follow the connection, Elizabeth Keckley was employer of Mary Todd Lincoln, who is the spouse of Abraham Lincoln. And here's that dress I just showed you that exists in Wikidata. So this dress was designed by Elizabeth Keckley. And then it's hard to see in this graph, but there is images from across different Smithsonian collections and institutions. So it goes beyond just one museum that they're able to connect through Wikidata. And I'll stop there because I'm conscious of the time here and I want to wrap up. But check it out. This, I think, is a really powerful example of connecting resources that may live in different silos through Wikidata and through linked data. This example was just showing you how sometimes you can make connections you wouldn't normally see by doing a traditional, like keyword search and seeing a list of results. So we're able to see Philip Glass is connected to Elizabeth Keckley and how he's connected. He wrote an opera, and one of the characters was Elizabeth Keckley. So I'll just ask you to imagine if we were able to do this with, for example, digital content held by all of our different cultural heritage organizations, and how powerful that would be for discovery. and access to our collections. I've given you some links, so take a look at those when I post the slides. And I'll just wrap up here. I do want to touch on impact and how this is going to affect us. Well, I sort of touched on this, but there's definitely going to be an impact on end users on the discovery side. Linked data can lead to better known item searching, but also browsing for serendipitous discovery, just jumping from relationship to relationship and from collection to collection. Linked data will lead to more connections to this larger universe of information, even if they start at the library, potentially, and more cross-disciplinary connections for researchers. Linked data definitely favors interdisciplinary research, the ability to connect researchers across multiple domains of knowledge. So someone doing work in this discipline may be totally unaware of someone doing similar work in another discipline. Okay, as far as impact on libraries, I talked about a couple of these. De-siloing our collections. So many of our databases, we have a catalog, we have a digital collection, we have an institutional repository. So linked data moves us towards de-siloing and connecting that data. More discoverability on the web is a big one. And this is definitely going to affect all staff, although significantly the staff that are doing metadata work in cataloging and systems. As far as what I want to leave you with in my short time with you, we definitely have these challenges have been discussed for years, but they haven't gone away. So there are definitely some technical barriers. Linked data is out of reach, some people feel at this time, but with projects through Wikidata, I think it's becoming more approachable to more people. Resource barriers, of course, exist with staffing and time to move to a new model, if you will. There's always questions of, if I invest all this time and effort, where's the proof that this is going to lead to more web visibility and better discovery for my end users? And I think a lot of the projects being worked on are showing you that now. And then just interest. Personally, my interest level has really fluctuated over the years, but I know this change is not going to happen overnight now. And I kind of think back to when libraries moved from, card catalogs to MARC and machine readable records and new ILSs. Like, that took many years. So this isn't going to happen overnight. So my message to you, if I piqued your interest, just try to stay involved by attending sessions like this, talking with other staff. I think we all want to continue to improve discovery and access for our communities. And here's a list of a few things you might want to consider doing if you're definitely interested. And then finally, I did want to mention, hopefully by the end of the month, if not early June, through the Minitex website, we're going to launch Linked Data 23 Things. And it's in collaboration with a group of other library staff and I, who've been meeting for over a year to plan this project. But it's going to be a free, self-paced learning opportunity that breaks linked data down into these manageable chunks called things, if you're familiar with that model. So you can go and spend half hour learning about one thing, and then another half hour a week later learning about another thing related to linked data. So look for information on that. And I believe I'm out of time, so I'll just leave my slide up for contact. And I'm willing to take some questions with the remaining minutes we have. Thank you.
Hey, Sarah, there's a couple of questions in the chat. One is, how does MARC relate to this? Will it be able to play a role in linked data?
It absolutely relates to this. So earlier when I mentioned BibFrame, there's definitely strides in moving towards BibFrame replacing the MARC format eventually. But as of now, I mean, you can actually go in to a MARC record and you can add URIs for in certain fields in MARC records for people, for example. So I went into this a little in more detail in the February training I did, but there's definitely the Program for Cooperative Cataloging through the Library of Congress has some guidance on this. And so even within OCLC, there's information in bib formats and bibliographic formats and standards that give you direction on which fields support URIs. So if you want to start to experiment, there's, you know, you can start putting URIs in MARC records. I'm not saying you should, but so I'll stop there. But eventually the idea is that BibFrame will replace MARC.
All right, thanks. So you can do it. May or may not want to do it right now.
Yes.
Another question, any tips on finding coding projects to volunteer for beginners?
Yeah, so I'm gonna go back. Where was it? I guess I'll just stop on this slide, but well, one of the points was join an existing project. There is, at least through Wikidata, is kind of a lower barrier way to get involved, and there's the linked data for libraries community out there. I think I shared, sorry, let me go back. I have some links early on. So I would probably point you to the PCC Wikidata pilot projects page. This is over 70 libraries that participated. There's also different groups within Wikidata that are actively working on adding content. But you know, feel free to email me afterwards. I have more info I can share with you. There's also a local group of us that talk about this monthly. So if you're interested, I could connect you with us. So contact me, or Jerry, if you could share the name, I can reach out to and share some more links. But that, off the top of my head, that's what comes to mind.
Great, thank you. And then someone typed in things, not strings. Not sure what that meant.
I believe they were referring to things, so not text. So let me see who wrote that.
Emily. Oh, MARC data has a lot of string data.
Yes, so I didn't really get into that, but we have a mix of codes and text in our MARC records, and it makes it harder to work with when you're doing machine processing and when you're wanting to share your data with others. I think that might have been the point of that comment.
All right, well, thank you so much, Sarah. It looks like our time is up.